Teresa Opheim loves her land, your land, and your neighbor's land. And she would really love it if you did all you could to protect it and have a plan for it after you're gone. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. When you listen to the names of some of the places where Teresa has worked over the years, you get a good sense of what she is all about. The Midwest Sustainable Agriculture Working Group, Practical Farmers of Iowa, Renewing the Countryside, Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, and currently she is the Executive Director of Climate Land Leaders. Sustainability, helping smaller farmers succeed, protecting the environment, and preserving a farm's legacy. Those are all important to Teresa. Let's begin our conversation with her on where this all started. Teresa, let's start with a little bit about your background. So you're an Iowa native who couldn't handle the heat of Iowa, apparently, and you've moved north to Minnesota.
There's more truth to that than you might think. I am from Mason City, Iowa, northern Iowa, and my family had owned or has owned farmland in northwest Iowa since 1888. I went to school in Iowa, worked for a variety of organizations, on the East Coast, and then led Practical Farmers of Iowa for 10 years, and then moved up to Minnesota, and I spent a lot of time on Lake Superior and in a sailboat. So that was a real draw to coming up this way.
All right, the sailboat thing's a little harder to do in parts of Iowa, I suppose. Tough to compete with Lake Superior. All right, so Climate Land Leaders. What's the vision there?
Yeah, our vision is we would like to see as diverse a landscape as possible, room for plants and animals and people to thrive. We provide community and support for landowners who are particularly interested in maximizing conservation on their lands. So we have about a little more than 50,000 acres in our cohort right now, and that's about 215 participants. They're all over the Midwest. Actually, their land is all over the Midwest, and a number of them live in various places elsewhere. We have one in Thailand, we have one in Hawaii, and they own Iowa farmland in both those cases. We started in 2020, just as everything was locking down, March 2020. And Zoom has been a real blessing for us because it's allowed us to bring together this really geographically diverse group of people who all want to focus on what they can do on their land to increase habitat and better protect the soils, improve water quality, provide for human homes and businesses to thrive.
And is that the commonality that unites all these folks? Was it, and were these some of these practices they were already doing, or was that genuine interest there and they just needed some guidance on how to proceed?
Most of them were already doing some conservation before we started, but they were interested in doing more, and they were interested in meeting with other landowners who are doing the same thing, whether it's a prairie restoration or planting cover crops or managing a woodland, whatever it is, they were interested in. Well, what did you do about, in Minnesota, buckthorn is a real issue. What do you do about buckthorn? Or did you use herbicides to establish your prairie? Or I have a farming tenant. How do I convince that tenant that planting cover crops would be a good idea? They have a variety of different conservation goals.
I'm so glad you brought up that example. How challenging is that when you have a tenant to make sure that you as the landowner, your principles and your core practices can be carried out? And how do you have that conversation?
We have a number of calls about that. The calls feature not only farmers telling the landowners who don't farm, this is what's reasonable for you to ask of me. And if you want me to plant cover crops, maybe give me a discount on rental rate. What are the strategies that might help get that done? A number of the landowners inherited their farming tenants from their parents. We have a lot of legacy land in this group. And some of them, frankly, have found new tenants who wanted to do more conservation. Others have just worked, using various uh, strategies worked with their existing tenants to get that conservation done. The first thing we do is always refer people to groups like Practical Farmers of Iowa in other groups that really work on getting farmers together to plant cover crops, for example. So we use, for climate land leaders, we use what social impact research tells us is most effective. So it's most effective if you have someone, you will more likely make change if you have someone in your kind of in your same situation. So in this case, it's landowners. But if it's farmers who you are wanting them to diversify their corn soybean rotation, the most effective spokespeople are other farmers who've already tried that and what they've learned. So we always refer folks to other great resources, whether extension, other nonprofits, et cetera.
Are most of your folks on the smaller side, or what's the typical acreage you're talking about?
Actually, we have a couple that are 20 acres and then up to 3,500, I think is the largest holding. Um, so a number of them have inherited, portions of what was a larger estate. So.
Legacy is very important to you. For our audience watching the video, they can see these colorful fabric designs hanging in your office behind you. But if you could you please describe them, especially for the folks who are listening audio only, because it's so colorful and vibrant behind you. Could you please explain what we're seeing behind you and the significance before we kind of get into the legacy side?
I would love to. So this I commissioned fabric art from a woman named Meg Prang, Prange. She lives in Southeast Iowa. And the one I'm most proud of is the one in the middle, which is a farmstead. And
But not just any farmstead.
it's my grandparents' farm that I grew up going to. It includes the house, apple trees. My grandfather planted an apple tree for each of his grandchildren. My
Mm.
grandmother working in the garden, a lot of fresh produce we ate growing up. The barn, chicken coop, etc., other buildings. And then in the background is a massive amount of green. And that was a huge windbreak. I wouldn't even call it a windbreak. We called it Fisher Woods. Their last name was Fisher, that my grandfather planted. And so I had this commissioned after my grandparents died. It is amazing what this woman can do in fabric, and I really highly recommend checking her out. None of the buildings, trees are left on that land
Mm.
now. And that's the Iowa story for so much of the state is now corn and soybeans, and it is very difficult to see any evidence of habitation on that land. And that is very sad for me. On the other hand, there wasn't anyone who wanted to stay home and farm. And
Mhm.
so it's also a recognition of are changing demographics as well. But I think what this fabric art illustrates is the intense attachment we have to place. Farmland is not just a commodity for anyone in our group, and I'm guessing for everyone in your audience. It's a place of piece of the earth um, where things grow, where there's been history, where there's been habitat for plants, animals, water, community. It's just so much more than than a commodity. And I think we all feel that, and that's why uh, this group of landowners I work with, those who aren't farming, have held on to their land, and it's why some have even sold it or given it up when the time was right.
And that legacy side of this is important to you, and yet another sort of foundational tenet of what your organization tries to do. Before we started recording this, you were talking about one of your initiatives will help, like siblings, for example, if they've inherited a farm from maybe grandma and grandpa, how that process works going forward. What do you do with that?
So we hold meetings for those who are in that situation. We have one coming up with a landowner who inherited land with her five siblings, and um, she's just going to talk through the hard, difficult conversations they had about what to do with the land after they inherited it. And others are going to share too their situations. As you as we've all heard, there are so many really sad stories about families breaking up when they inherit farmland. We've told those stories on some of our other calls. In this case, uh, the woman who's leading it, the landowner who's leading it, had read a book called Crucial Conversations, and and that really helped her navigate, what to ask of the other siblings and how to gauge where they were coming from. I remember her telling me that one, she had wanted to do some conservation on a very small amount of land, like an acre of the 120 that they inherited. And she had some pushback from a couple of the siblings on that. Well, that tells her, their values, their conservation
Mm-hmm.
values are a little different than mine. And, so she had to negotiate that moving forward. So, uh, yeah, so then we just provide some support for them who are for those who are working through that. And then of course always suggest that they refer to professionals to help with these gnarly legal issues surrounding farmland legacy. So
And of course, the first word in your organization's name is climate. So you are engaging with people at a highly politically divisive time where the term climate change can be an immediate turnoff. And I appreciate that a lot of the folks who are part of your organization, that's probably not the way they view it. And they are seeing a serious threat to our environment with everything that we've been experiencing with this volatile weather and everything else, and how we're growing corn in places we didn't used to corn. We used to grow corn and other crops that have changed and all that kind of stuff. Before we kind of get into that, if you could share, how do you engage with people who may not feel that same passion, the same belief, the same interpretation of what's happening when it comes to climate change? How do you still try to bring them into the fold where you may have some commonality with conservation efforts or something like that?
yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, the group of landowners we work with are firmly committed to the fact that our climate is changing fairly rapidly, and it's gonna require absolutely everything we have to ensure that we have enough food. Um, we have water quality for water that's drinkable, swimmable, into the future. Um, However, they work in their communities and they work in other organizations where we do have people who do not believe that we have human-induced climate change. Sometimes it doesn't really matter if which side of the climate change uh, debate people are on. Keeping your soil covered is good for everyone. And so, if you just talk about conservation, what we can do together as far as conservation, that is sometimes all the conversation that they need to have. So I think it's good to point out that we are seeing an increasing number of billion-dollar weather disasters. And we also are seeing really strange weather. We have a climate land leader in Northeast Iowa who's had a tornado, a derecho, drought, and flooding all within a couple years.
Gosh,
How do you make a living when with all this volatility?
seriously.
Last weekend in eastern Wisconsin, 16 inches of rain, or 14, I think it was 14 inches of rain in 16 hours. It's just not possible to handle that kind of weather volatility without some, major commitment on our part to keep our soil covered, um, keep the rain where it falls as much as possible, all kinds of conservation. So that's where we're coming from. I think it just depends on what kind of conversation you need to have. And um, so, for example, working at Practical Farmers of Iowa, I would say the thing that absolutely united everyone was wanting to have people on the land, wanting to have that next generation of farmers. It didn't matter where you're coming from politically, everyone wants vibrant rural communities and wants to see a new generation on the land. So anytime we can like, okay, here's an example. A landowner wants to transition some land from corn and soybeans to a grass-based livestock operation because that would help bring a new generation onto the land.
Hmm.
Younger people seem to kind of like the livestock. They want to bring the livestock back. And so, that's a conversation you can have. That would be good for the climate, but it also would help that next generation. So.
So, what kind of practical, I'm going to borrow the name from your former organization, Practical Farmers, but what practical steps are you giving to your members? No individual person is going to immediately flip the climate around to make it less volatile. So, what are the practices that you could convey to people where they can do something that makes it better?
Yeah, well, this particular group I work with, at the beginning of the year, they set their conservation goals, and they can be from, we had one restoring 100 acres of prairie this year, which is a very big conservation goal, to clearing buckthorn from 5 acres. So they
Hmm.
they decide on their conservation goal. They share goals. They share it with the other climate land leaders because if you share something publicly, you're more likely to follow through. We know from research. And then we find out what they need to help implement those goals. So we have calls coming up, for example, on using herbicide to help with prairie restoration, or we had one on tiling and someone who wanted to restore a wetland, but the land is all tiled. How's that going to affect the
Hmm.
neighbors? How did they handle that situation? Really practical kind of implementation strategies. Our meetings are not public. They're for those who are part of the cohort. And for that reason, they are really free to share with each other, this didn't work. I had trouble with this federal agency because of this program, and it didn't work for me, and I got out of it, out of that program. Whatever
Hmm.
the issues they have in helping them achieve their goals. Then at the end of the year, we check and make sure, or check in with them to see what happened, and we celebrate the successes because it's a lot of time and money to do these massive restoration projects that some of them are doing. And then, of course, everyone is, the climate land leaders do tend to skew a little older. So my age and older because they've inherited farmland. So they're dealing with aging parents,
Hmm. Hmm.
the health concerns that we all have as we get older. So there's just a lot going on. I will say though, it's a absolutely wonderful community of people who have a wide variety of life experiences. And I just love doing the work, and I'm glad this is my last job that I get to do this.
I would think one of the cool aspects of your job dealing with so many people from different backgrounds and, like you mentioned, geographically diverse as well, is hearing about unique ideas that some of these folks can then share in these cohorts that you can go, hey, that's cool. That's something I hadn't thought of or hadn't seen it in practice. Is there anything like that that you can share?
Like a specific
Hmm.
example.
Hmm.
Let's see.
I wanted to put you on the spot, see if I can
Yeah.
get your wheels turning.
Well, one thing that a number of them are interested in right now is biochar. So they're doing these experiments with biochar, but that's probably not the best example.
Okay.
Let's see. One that really comes to mind is a family who restored a wetland, and because we're all part of a watershed, they essentially had to put in some kind of berm to keep the water from flowing further downhill.
Hmm.
And that was really a popular call because a lot of people are facing that same situation. So they worked with Fish and Wildlife Service and with NRCS. They're very good users of federal and state conservation programs. And so they shared what they had done there, and then someone else did the same thing with their wetland restoration. So that's one example. Lots of discussion on, for example, soil health. We have a program where we bring a soils educator out to the farms and take soil samples because a lot of the climate land leaders knew very little about their soils, as most of us, even some of the great conservation folks knew very little about their soils. So we have had a number of calls discussing soil organic matter and, how can I tell if I'm making a difference
Hmm.
with my soils, and really celebrating just the incredible life that is in healthy soil that we didn't, we're still discovering. We didn't know much at all about when I started working in the 40 years ago. Um, so those are some examples.
You mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that this is your last job.
Yeah.
What is it? Why do you care about this so much?
Well, I grew up going to this farm.
Hmm.
That I mentioned earlier. I've always been very interested in how we grow our food. I'm a very big user of farmers markets and consider my quality of life to be so much better having known the people grown who grow my food. I get a big kick out of about learning about growing food and hanging out with farmers. So those were really strong motivators.
And you're clearly connected to history. You seem to have an appreciation, the way you're able to tell the story about the fabric art hanging behind you and tracing your family back to the 1880s.
That's true. I'm very interested in the history of our land. I'm passionate about land and land use. I just think that's a fascinating area. And and most of the climate land leaders are as well. One thing we encourage them to do is write a farm legacy letters where they're recording those memories and then their hopes for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And those can be the greatest gift that they're giving their next generation, just sharing that information about the smell of the lilacs blooming, or the sound of the um, boots hitting the entryway, when you come in from the barn, all the squeak of the swing out on the porch. All of those memories are just really important to convey. At the same time, it's also very important to be thinking ahead in the future. And right now, it's very hard to think ahead to the next day, given our political volatility as well as weather volatility. But we need to be preparing for what is our land going to look like in 2050, for example. And that's not very far off, but most of us don't even think that far ahead. We're thinking of a couple years at most, or at the point where I may pass on, and
Mm-hmm.
but we are encouraging people to do that, so they think about, well, what do I most want to convey to that future generation, whether they're related or not. We have a number of people who do not have biological offspring, and they frankly have a little more flexibility about what to do with their land
Mm-hmm.
than those of us who are planning to care for biological offspring with our land inheritance. So, but yes, history, absolutely love it. I read absolutely everything I can find.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Teresa, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your passion and for helping others understand this as you do. We really appreciate the conversation.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed talking with you.
You can find out more about the Climate Land Leaders publication, Land Legacies, Stories from Landowners for Landowners. Just head to our website, AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. It's the place where landowners get their news. Now, it's also the place where you can read profile pieces like ours about Teresa, and you can learn about her organization's Land Legacy Project. While you're there, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. It has the latest news, trends, interviews, and opportunities for farmland owners, operators, and investors. Again, just go to AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.